Hello, I'm Annetha Hall with ICMBC, the host of this Zoom panel discussion with Dr. Carmen Bynoe Bovell, author of The 4 R's of Parenting. Also on the panel are Dr. Desiree de Florimont, Mrs. Gretel James, Mrs. Sarah Bacchus-Martin, Ms. Denise Thorne, and Mr. Marlon Bovell. The discussion will be centered around the book, and the panel will be sharing their perspectives as contributors to this book as they represent parents, young adults, and elders. Welcome to our audience on the multiple outlets, including Guyana Graphic, Guyanese United, and ICMBC. So it's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome the panel, and I'm first going to start, of course, with the author herself, Dr. Carmen Bovell. She's an early childhood professional, having spent her entire career, I won't say the number, she can say that if she would like, multiple years, however. Her professional experiences include teaching at the preschool, elementary, and university level, and leading and managing early childhood programs at the local and federal levels. Dr. Bovell has also served as a visiting Fulbright Scholar and Fulbright Specialist at the University of the West Indies Mona campus in Jamaica, and as a Fulbright Specialist at the University of Guyana. Dr. Bovell was born in Guyana, where she attended primary school and high school and graduated with a teacher's diploma from the Guyana Teachers Training College. She immigrated to the US in 1969 and continued her professional education, earning a doctorate degree in early childhood special education with a concentration in social and emotional disorders of preschool-age children from the University of Maryland, College Park. Since her retirement from federal service, Dr. Bovell has continued working in her field as an independent consultant, mentor, and coach. Dr. Bovell currently resides in Raleigh, North Carolina, after living over 50 years in Maryland. She's the proud mother of 3 adult children and grandmother of 7. Welcome, Dr. Bovell. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I wanted to start my question, and then I'm going to ask you to introduce the rest of the panel. But I really wanted to ask you about this book. It really is quite fascinating. And one of the things that I found really interesting was the way in which you did it. So my question is twofold. One, what really brought you to the place where you wanted to write this book? And then why did you decide to do it in the way you did, which was through a series of interviews where people spoke in their own voice about their experiences with parenting and specifically with your 4 R's?
Thank you, Mrs. Hall. Thanks to you and your husband for having us on your show, your program this evening. I'm very delighted to be here, to be able to share a few of the panelists and to share the book. Now, you know, sometimes I think that writing this book was some kind of a God-given purpose, because it's been on my mind for as long as I remember, ever since I started working with young children. And I've worked with children ages birth to 8. Most of my career I've spent working with children birth to 5 years old. And I have observed the behaviors of so many children that concerned me. And these were little kids. And I've wondered, where is this coming from? They come into the preschool program, and so many of them have challenging behaviors. They present challenging behaviors to their teachers. Teachers are coming to my office. I don't want this child in my class. This child is disturbing my class. And I have always been concerned about children's social and emotional development. And I have, over the years, I've worked about, I would say, 42 years with the very young children, birth to 5. And over, even before the end of my, well, before I retired, not the end of my career because I'm still working, I really wanted to help parents. I thought that parenting is challenging. It's been very difficult. And the parents of these children that I had so many concerns about, they didn't seem to have the knowledge, the understanding, the patience to parent. And so their parenting styles and their interpersonal relationships with their children and other family members were reflected in the behaviors of their children. Because, you know, parents are role models. Children watch and listen 100% of the time when they're with their parents. They're watching and they're listening and they're learning. And so I thought, parents need help, and I will find a way, a meaningful way to help them. And I thought that meaningful way could be them hearing from their peers, not from the researchers, not from me as a researcher, but hearing from their own peers how they mitigated these challenges. And so I decided, well, I said this book has been always on my mind. Social emotional development of young children has always been on my mind. For my master's thesis, I wrote on social emotional development, and for my doctoral thesis, my topic was cultural differences in parenting and the influences on child behaviors in the preschool classroom. Because by that time, I was certain that parenting had a lot to do, or has a lot to do, with child behavior that I observed over the years working with children. And so, because the preschool program that I've worked the longest in, the federally funded Head Start program, has as a major component parent engagement. And so we worked with parents, we provided training to parents in child development and parenting, and we could see the difference. But in writing this book, I did not want to go to like I said earlier, the researchers. I wanted peer-on-peer, just a conversational kind of exchange. You tell me how you did this. Tell me your thoughts on parenting. Tell me your challenges and tell me how you resolve those issues. What recommendations do you have for parents? Because I thought that was a better approach. So I decided to interview 21 parents, 6 young folks who are not yet parents, and 14 folks who are grandparents, you know, the elders, the wise, who they've been on this earth a long time. They've observed a lot, and they have great advice to offer parents. And so the parents that I chose and the young adults that I chose are because I've known them, wow, forever. For instance, Sarah, I've known her mother even before she became pregnant with Sarah. I've watched her raise Sarah, and I've observed Sarah as a young woman, and she is living her life in a manner that would make her mother proud. I've chosen Marlon because likewise, he's father of children and he is doing a terrific job. I've watched Dr. DeFlarmont raise her daughter, and I'm observing her daughter as she has grown into a beautiful, responsible young woman and living her life as a responsible citizen. I've chose Mrs. Gretel James. I chose her because I've known her for such a long time, and she speaks with authority, and she cares. She's a church member of mine. She cares about children and families, and she is one to say to a child, you got to stop that. This is what you can do instead. And I've chosen Mrs. Thorne because I've known her a long time. I've been very close to her. I've watched her raise her children. I've gotten very close to her children. I admire them. I'm proud of them. So every contributor was selected because of my knowledge of them, how they live their lives in respectful, responsible ways, and how they've raised their kids and how their kids are living their lives.
Thank you. Thank you. That really totally makes so much sense, because I do think people learn best when they're hearing from their peers, as opposed to, as you said, the researchers. Putting that real face and that real voice gives an authenticity to what you're reading, and you're more able to listen to it and to learn from it as well.
Yeah.
So I'd like to, as you've introduced and talked a little bit about your panel, I'd like to now turn to the panel and ask them one of my first questions, which is, what are your thoughts about parenting? And Marlon, I'm going to start with you up in the corner there. Why don't you tell us about your thoughts about parenting?
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. My thoughts on parenting are that parenting is the most important job there is that we can have. We have the job of providing so that our kids can be healthy and strong, to provide education for them. But in between that providing and working is the job of being a parent. The 4 R's come into play. I'm thinking of them as we sit here, and those are the basic 4 facets of being a parent, and they're so important in so many different ways. And in reading the book and seeing other people's views, you realize or you learn that just because you did something one way doesn't mean it was the best way or the only way. And the book has been refreshing in that matter to me. So I believe that parenting for myself and my wife is our #1 duty and the most important job that we actually have right now.
Thank you. Desiree, I'm going to ask you the same question. Oh, and you need to unmute. There you go. Lovely.
Yes. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much. I am so delighted to be here to speak on this very, very critical subject of parenting. As Marlon just said, you know, it's the biggest and the most important responsibility we have once we are gifted with God's co-creation to do the best that we can. I believe that parenting is really an ongoing and a daily learning experience. It's not something, you know, you do it today and you forget it tomorrow. But we're parenting so that our children can be nurtured and protected and guided to become the best version of themselves, a well-rounded human being. That should be our goals as parents. There are no handbooks out there, but I dare say that Dr. Bovell's book comes close as each parent who contributed to the book talked about their experiences, talked about the challenges. It's hard work being a parent, but oh, it can be so very rewarding, especially as children grow older. Carmen mentioned knowing me for a long time. She knew me even before my daughter was born. And after I saw her little one, I knew I had to have one like hers. And so I've been parenting for 45 years. I've been a single parent. And as I said, it doesn't come with a handbook But a lot of things that we learn as parents, we learn, at least specifically for me, I learned from watching my mom. And I think a lot of people can say they parent the way their parents raised them. But parents are a child's first teacher, and their parenting styles, and there are lots of parenting styles. There are 4 specific ones that I'm not going to get into right now, but parents can be authoritarian all the way down to authoritative with being permissive and being just uninvolved parents. And we know that each style of parenting has its pluses and minuses. And some parents may use a combination of those parenting styles as they work with children. But the most important thing, and Carmen mentioned it earlier, as a parent, you've got to be a role model. You've got to embrace those values and those morals. If you want your child to be a certain way and behave a certain way, then as a parent, you have got to model that. Children will follow. They're like little parrots, you know, at home in Guyana, you hear parrots mimicking everything that they hear you say. Children are the same way, not only in words, but in their behaviors. In order to teach children to be respectful and responsible and to demonstrate reciprocity and restraint, then parents have to embrace that. So to me, I think that parenting is so critical, and what we need to do is strive to be the best parents we can be. Some of us think we know how, and as Marlon said, we find out from hearing from others that we don't always know the best way. None of us are perfect, none of our children are perfect, but we do want to lay a foundation. The good book says, bring up a child, the way that he should go, and when he's old, he or she will not depart from it. So as parents, that's what we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask a question now specific to the 4 R's of this book: respect, responsibility, reciprocity, and restraint. And in particular, in the days that we are living in now, why are these important? And I'm going to start with you, Denise, and then move to Gretel for this particular question. And Denise, you'll need to unmute.
I'm sorry, I got slightly distracted here. Can you recap the last part of your question, please?
Sure. So, you know, the 4 values in the book that we're talking about: respect, responsibility, reciprocity, and restraint. Why are they particularly important, especially, I think, in the context of the days that we are living in now?
Certainly. I'm going to digress just a little bit and say that I think society has kind of lost its way from where we were, and when I say we were, I'm talking about the elders were being raised. And because of that, the 4 R's are very important in bringing kids back into that fold, or back into that frame of mind, that focus. Because right now, everything is really upside down. And I'm not referring to the pandemic. Before the pandemic, the way people get things done, I was in a conference not too long ago and was really flabbergasted by this stat. Gen Z's attention span is 8 seconds. Yes, that was my reaction, 8 seconds. Now I understand why the marketing folks keep bombarding us with so much information. And because of all these things, we have lost our way. And so respect, responsibility, reciprocity and restraint are very, very important in helping people to focus and to get back on track into doing things the way it should be done. And I say it should be done because if you go beyond the mass of people, and when I say mass, if anyone knows anything about Maslow hierarchy or Peter Drucker, you know that 1% of the world's population are the leaders. Trust me, they're still doing things that way. But the masses have somehow lost their way. And that's what we need to be able to help our young people when they have children, bring their kids back into the fold and stay focused. So the 4 R's are very important because it encompasses all the values, all the things that we need to do to get back into focus. The 1%, they have not lost focus. They will tell you their children are not on Facebook, they're not on Instagram, they're not doing these things, but they sell it to us, meaning the masses. We take it on, we lose focus. And I'm not saying Facebook and those things are the only thing, but in general, we've lost focus. And so we need the 4 R's to get back on track.
Gretel, would you agree with that?
I certainly do. And those 4 things are so interrelated. If you've got a respectful person, they are going to be responsible. If you've got a respectful person who's responsible, they are going to do reciprocity, treat others like they want to be treated, and they will use restraint. So they all feed on each other. I'm a retired elementary education teacher, and when I started teaching in 1962, I say, and for lack of a better term, it was the most civilized state of life. When I went in the classroom, and classrooms are large in South Carolina, I could leave 42 children in the class to go to the office, and they didn't move. Before my career was over in 2000, I could turn to the blackboard and somebody throw something at my head. So you saw the big change. And my frame of reference for parenting is back to my parents and their peers, who very few people had a formal education, and most of them at that time didn't have a high school education, but they had common sense, they valued education, they taught their children to respect authority, and most of all, they believed in God because they were respectful, responsible people of reciprocity and restraint. So I think we lost all of that in the 60s. You know, the society changed in the 60s with the Vietnam War. So many people came back drug addicted. That affected families. Then we had the women's movement, burning the bras. Then the meism time, the really meism, when I want what I want now, and I don't care how I get it. That's no respect, and certainly not reciprocity. Well, I think we've begun to lose that. Black community lost family, and they lost neighborhood following the civil rights movement, when we could get better jobs, moved away from the core family, and we lost a lot in that. I think about helping children a lot now, but I don't know how to get to them because I'm not in the neighborhood with them. But these are what I call universal, eternal character traits that will always lead to a more productive life, no matter what your station in life is. And I'd love to see us get back to it. Thank you.
So Sarah, you are representing our young adult. And you're a young parent?
No, not yet. I'm not.
Okay,
so parent. I'm not a parent as yet.
Okay, but would you share with us as your thoughts about the 4 R's you see it for parenting, if you were in fact the recipient of the 4 R's, and would you in fact, if you decide that that's the road that you want to do to become a parent, are these 4 R's something that you would look to as part of the way you would raise your child?
Oh, absolutely, yes. The 4 R's, especially with respect, to piggyback off of what Miss Thorne and Miss James were saying, I think that our generation is so different, and our young people, that they don't seem to have the respect that I grew up with, that my peers and those before me grew up with. So it would be very important for me to teach them about respect, and I think that's something that's lacking. I think respect for yourself, self-respect is lacking. I think respect for life is lacking. I think respect for just a process, a system. I think all of that is gone. So therefore you have young people who are rebelling, and depending on how they were parented, they're rebelling. It may come against what we see as right. They're rebellious, so what they're doing, they have their peers telling them, oh yes, that's the right way to do it, we're going to think. But if they weren't parented to have some type of discipline, some type of restraint, then they're just going to just rebel and go against what the right way to do things. And then when you want to tell them, that's not what you should do, or maybe that's not how you should do it, they don't have respect enough to listen. They just want to do what they want to do, however they want to do it. So I believe in the 4 R's of parenting. And when I think about my mother and how she parented me, my mother was a single parent. When I think about how she parented me, she was very, very she was very, very strong about me being responsible for my behavior, being respectful to adults and to the systems in place. And she was very big on restraint. And she was also very big on making sure that everything I do is, I understand what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and what the cause and effect of it is. So I definitely plan on teaching my children basing on the 4 R's, just how my mother taught me,
I'd like to ask each of you to answer my next question, which is, so there are 4 R's. Would you say that any one of them is the most important? If somebody said you can only have one, which would that one be? And I'm going to start with, not you, Carmen, and I'm going to come back to you on this one, but I'm going to start with Marlon and then work through.
The first thing that came to mind was reciprocity, but I think before you can even get to reciprocity, you have to have respect, and you start by respecting yourself. So once you respect yourself, you can understand what reciprocity would mean for others. So I'll pick respect.
Desiree?
I think Marlon and I are on the same page. Respect is tantamount. It's very critical. If you don't respect yourself, you don't have self-respect, how are you going to have respect others, first of all? How can you teach respect to your children if you don't respect yourself? I think respect can be like the umbrella, and responsibility, reciprocity, and restraint can come onto them. And this is jarring my nerves. I had an experience in the supermarket just a couple of days ago. And there was this parent and her young child. And the words that came out of that parent's mouth,
we've all witnessed.
My goodness. First of all, I'm saying if she had any respect for herself, she would not address her child in that way. And so when the child goes to school now and use the same type of language and behaviors with the teacher, who's to blame? You know, whose fault is it? So for me, again, respect is tantamount. It's very important of the four principles. Unmute.
You need to, yes.
I said, I agree. Ditto, Marlon and Desiree. Respect, very, very important. Respect has gone right out. I don't know where it went. It's gone. People do not respect each other. They don't care about each other, as Gretel says. Me, it's the meism. I want it now. Don't tell me I can't have it, because I'm going to have it no matter what. That's what we're dealing with today. And they don't care. I'll give you a simple example. My husband and I own a catering business. There are rules and regulations right now in place which prohibit venues from having more than a certain number of people in their space for events. But this bride wants to have her 125 guests. But once I started questioning the protocol for safety in terms of COVID at the venue, that was the end of it. She said, oh, can you call me back? I called her back, never responded, never heard from her. She didn't care. All she wanted was what she wanted, and don't tell me I can't have it.
There's a lot of that around right now, that's for certain.
Yeah.
So she had no respect for the law, nothing. That didn't even matter to her. So yeah, respect.
Gretel?
I agree. Respect is the first and most important. And from that, all these others emanate. And like I say, we are so bent on what I want. We don't respect anybody. And I want what I want. And we'll do anything to get it, including murder these days. So respect is, for me, is the most important. And children learn what they live, and then they in turn live what they've learned. Now, I had an experience too several years ago in school. I was working on a magnet program, and this little boy would curse like you wouldn't believe. So they called the mother in to talk about it. And you know, the first thing came out of her mouth, I can't say it all, but she says, well, I'll begin with a D. I don't know whether begin with a H it came from. So that told us right there where it came from. Children learn what they live.
Yes.
Sure. Sarah? Which of the 4 R's?
Well, I agree with everyone. I mean, respect, you can't, it's kind of the alpha of the alpha omega as far as all of this is concerned. But I also want to touch on responsibility. I think responsibility is very important, because once you have respect, if you have to pick one, I would obviously pick respect. But I feel like responsibility, I know I don't leave it out, because I just feel like a lot of times there's a lack of accountability and a lack of responsibility for the things that we do, things that people do. I find that sometimes people they want to do what they want to do, and then when you call them out on it, they're like, well, you know, and so they don't care, you know. But I feel like responsibility is very, very, very significant. It's very important. And I kind of would put it like a 49-40, I would put it like a 49-50 type of thing as far as it's concerned, because I just don't, I just feel like respect is a lot, there's a lot to go with, responsibility. I feel like responsibility is very crucial and critical. And I just think that people just don't have it. There's not enough around. There's not enough going around. Mm-hmm. I just think people kind of, you know, that with that, they just don't have enough of it.
Carmen, as the author of the book, the person who talked to all of these people, or, you know, that contributed to it. What is your number one R, if you will?
Well, that's going to be very difficult for me to select one, because you look at the cover of the book, you look at the graphic, you'll see that they're all intertwined. You see the arrows going back and forth?
Yeah.
It's very difficult for me to separate them, even though I agree with everything everyone has said. They build on each other, they support each other, but respect, I agree that if, as Gretel said, if you have self-respect, you will respect others. And that respect will lead to you behaving responsibly, right? Treating other people the way you want to be treated, exercising restraint, self-control, because you don't want to say whatever comes to mind and do whatever comes to mind. You have to have self-control. But the reason why I chose these 4 R's as very important is because the children's behaviors that I observe: respect, disrespecting teachers, cursing teachers, even I heard a 4-year-old call his 4-year-old white child call his black teacher nigger. I heard a 5-year-old tell the principal to shut her effing. This child was 5, and he was using the F word to the principal of the school. I heard it. The responsibility, not doing their homework, right? And not caring, not keeping a tidy area, their areas in their classrooms, not wanting to help clean up the classroom after they have used it and made it and have it in disarray. And just, you know, just an array of things. Restraint to me was the biggest, the most difficult behavior for young children to implement. Self-control, because they weren't taught it, they didn't understand it, they didn't know how to exercise that holding back, self-control, because they weren't taught. You have to teach these 4 R's. You have to teach. You have to model these behaviors, and then you have to talk about them. You have to have your children live them out, and you have to give feedback to your children. I want to talk about restraint because many of the parents that I interviewed said this was their challenge. I believe Marlon Bovell said that. And other parents said it's so difficult because, and you know why parents are tired? They work 8 hours or more and they come home and they're tired, and then they have the responsibilities of parenting, of housekeeping, of taking care of their families, and the tempers are short. You know, they're short-tempered and they're quick to lash out, yell, scream, slap, curse, you know. Difficult to exercise restraint because they snap. It's easy. Stress causes them to snap. And so it's important that parents learn alternative ways of behaving when they're stressed. So hopefully if they read the book, they'll hear what, you know, and learn some strategies shared in this book by their peers.
That's an important point, because I want to ask this question as you talk about restraint in particular, and as you note, you know, parents nowadays are sort of coming home after an 8-hour day, if you count in their commuting time, and then they still have to deal with their children. But the fact is that many of us had working parents too. And yet our own parents were able to somehow find that restraint. What changed? What has shifted so that we are now looking at, we have to read a book or something, as opposed to it seemed to come more naturally to our parents' generation? What changed?
Well, Gretel and Denise mentioned, some of the things, the Vietnamese War, the meism, the me generation, ways of, one thing that has changed is the fact that we have more single parent families now, more mothers raising children alone, or even some fathers raising children alone. And so it's so much more difficult. When I raised my kids, when I lived in Guyana, I had 2 kids. Before I left for work, my mother came. When I came home from work, my mother had dinner fixed, and I could just relax and play with my kids. And again, my mother had passed on to me certain values that I knew she was passing on to my kids, and I had the responsibility of passing, of just reinforcing what my mother did with my kids when I was at work and I came home. And so Denise talks about the village, and I interviewed her younger daughter. She also talks about the importance of the village, and one other parent that I interviewed talked about the support that she received. Nowadays, I don't know if the village is as present, as prominent, as pronounced. Is the village there?
I think I do think that's an excellent point. I myself don't think it is as much. And I think that, as we've talked about that meism, I think to a certain extent, we're all a little bit guilty of that too. There's this sense of, well, I'm doing this, I'm going to school, I'm going to work, I'm doing a number of things, and it'll make me better. And our argument is because we hope to make your life better, you, the child, better. But I think sometimes our own decisions about what we're doing, and unfortunately, because we don't have that village.
Yeah.
I only lived in Guyana for 3.5 years. But when I was there, my grandmother was there. There were various cousins there. The aunties, everybody had the aunties, ladies who were either related or sometimes actually not related to you, but distantly related. They were second cousins or whatever it was. And those people formed the network so that there was always somebody there. And we don't necessarily have that network of aunties and ladies of the family who provided that coverage for us. I think to a certain extent, that's some of what we're missing, because we have to do what we have to do, but we don't have everything that we need to get it done in the way that it used to be done. That village that you talk about, and it sounds a little cliche, but it is so important. And in some ways, I think we have to figure out ways to get back to that, to provide that support to people. It doesn't seem, the culture here is different.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily look at that as being a good thing. I will tell you, I myself, my daughter and her husband and the 3 grandchildren live with us. It's wonderful as far as I'm concerned. I'm not sure they always believe that, quite frankly. Try to stay out of their business, but the fact is that in my mind, that's the village. I know of parents who have said to me, I can't believe you've got them living with you. What, where's your freedom? I don't know what freedom I'm supposed to want.
Well, the other thing I just thought about, this is a question you raised with me a couple of weeks ago. Now with parents working at home, and their children are at home, virtual schooling, and parents have to assist them, parents are super stressed nowadays. super stress.
Yes.
So my concern is, how are they dealing with that stress in terms of the restraint value? See, because the responsibilities are double. They have a heavier load when it comes to the responsibility. And so, stress and restraint. Restraining from abusing their children.
Mm-hmm. And I think restraint is something that people have to think about as they maybe have to look at not overcommitting themselves.
Yes.
Sometimes you just have to say no to what seems like that's the opportunity of a lifetime. Well, it may be that you have to let some things go. I think when you become a parent, you sometimes have to make choices that may not benefit you exactly, but it will benefit the child, because there's no such thing as a child who said, pick me, have me.
No.
Children don't have that choice. We made the choice. Therefore, we have the responsibility to ensure that it works for them.
Yes, yes. I would like to hear from any of the panelists who would like to talk on this, the impact of COVID-19 on families. What kind of suggestions they have for parents? That's the question you and I have talked about.
Yes.
I think it's a very important question at this time. So anyone who has any suggestions for parents, feel free to speak.
I'll speak.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Greta.
Since there's not the village we spoke of in earlier times and in healthier times, there'll be somebody you could call in on from the community to come in and help. But now it calls for the family to band together and to organize. This calls for great organization and structure. Making schedules, assigning responsibilities, timelines, and all that kind of thing. And also scheduling in that some time to relax, go out and walk, stretch, and talk to each other. But it calls for great responsibility and organization among the family. Everybody has to buy into it.
That's right.
Yeah, I concur with you, Gretel, and I also want to add, as Carmen said, during this time, it's so stressful. I remember early on, I don't have kids in the house, and I was feeling stressed and depressed. And so I can imagine a home with parents trying to homeschool their kids. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are not familiar if they're not adept with technology, right. But they're have struggled to learn all of that. I find that some ways that would be helpful is to think about your emotional as well as your physical well-being. And so some self-care, you mentioned, go for a walk sometimes. Okay, I'm going to restrain myself from yelling and whatever. I'm going to the park. I'm going for a walk, or do like me, take a nap, and don't disturb me for the next half an hour. This is my time to just chill and relax and, settle down. So that tension and that stress that can be built in the environment without the extended family that most of us grew up with, and nobody to turn to. So you have to think of ways, of communicating. Okay, this is not the time. Let's talk about it a little later after I've had my nap, or after I've had my walk, or after I had a sip of something.
Marlon, what do you say?
Well, I think I'm not going to say I'm the only one. I'm going to assume that I'm the only one with kids at home in school right now. So I believe that assumption
You're
may
right.
be correct.
I think you're right.
So we have 2 kids still in school, and I'm seeing really it depends on the personality of the child. One of our children no problems. Work is done on time. The other, it's difficult to practice restraint because in my mind, if remember how our parents used to say, I used to walk 5 miles to school, both uphill, home and to school, uphill every day. They're at home. You don't have to ride the bus. You have more time in the morning to get ready. I cannot understand why the other child cannot be on time in front of the computer and ready to go. So to me, it's difficult to practice restraint because I just don't get it. But not being that person, he is who he is. So he has his own feelings, and we try to talk about it. We try to ask, how are you feeling? Why aren't you being able to do this? Is there anything wrong? And when the response is there's nothing wrong, then it makes it even more difficult for me to understand. So the restraint part is very difficult right now. But we do take walks. We try to walk 3 days a week. After school is done and after work is done, we all go out as a family. We were doing it consistently for about 2 months, but we've kind of trailed off. So the walks did help. They helped a lot. And to the point of the village, I remember the village when I was younger, going to cricket with my parents every weekend. It seemed like everybody was your mother or father. You couldn't do anything without someone being able to put you in line. Nowadays, I think people are timid to say something to another child that's not theirs because of the response they will get from that parent. And it goes back to a lot of things that Ms. Thorne and Ms. James said about that 8-second time span and the lack of responsibility and restraint that I remember hearing kids raising kids. And I think that those kids not understanding how to be a parent, still acting like a child, has just been an irresponsible way of, trying to raise their kids. So not understanding how to parent and not being taught that they pass it on, and generationally, we just seem to pass it down and pass it down. So, but I think for my family, I still feel that the village is there, but it's structured differently. The village used to be right outside your door or in your neighborhood. Now the village seems to be a phone call, and then going back to what Ms. James said, is trying to schedule something. Can you help me do this because I have to be here? And well, the village has changed now, but I think it's still there. It's just not as strongly structured as it used to be, or as at a hand's reach as it used to be. It's more so like a phone call now.
I think that's right. I do think that's right. I'd like to ask another question specific to the book. And it's a little bit related to what we just talked about, but what support do you think parents need in raising their children, and who do you think should provide that support? And I'm going to start with you, Denise.
Well, we still need the village, regardless of what happens. And some way, somehow, we have to try to rebuild that village and the concept of the village. Because I can tell you, this is just my opinion, but I do believe as long as we do not have the village, things will continue to fall apart. Because the village, imagine the village is like a band around the families. And once that band is broken, there's nothing to hold it up. So as long as we don't return to the village or the concept of the village, we're always going to be faced with the issues. And there's another thing that I think really has played a lot into our lives, and that is social media. I believe we have to, at some point in time, learn to turn Mark Zuckerberg off. In other words, turn Facebook off. Even if it's for a day, half a day, This constant bombardment that keeps crossing our phones, the notifications, and all the other things that come with it, we're losing even more focus in our lives as to how we should be living and how we should be doing things. You know, my business, I need Facebook and Instagram, but I'm struggling with it because on one hand, I could see what it's doing to society, but on the other hand, I need it for the business.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point in time, though, you have to say enough is enough, and you have to manage it and control it. Otherwise, it will control you. And that's one of the problems that we are faced with today.
Sarah, as our young adult, our young representative, what's your take on social media and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and particularly, and I guess this is, Marlon, for you as well with younger children, but particularly as they look to those vehicles to set standards for them, because we're telling them one thing at home, but they're looking at that and TikTok and you know, everybody wants to be famous. Everybody wants to have that. So how do you balance their having access, but also not letting it control and lead them? And I'll start with you, Sarah, and then I do want to hear from you, Marlon.
Oh, I mean, to be honest with you, I always said I was so lucky I didn't grow up with social media, because it's just, to me, I mean, me being an adult now, you know how to limit it. You know how to, there's enough time for this, there's time for this, there's time for that. But as a teenager, everything is so superficial because of it. I think social media, I think it's a good thing, but I also think, as with anything, if it's not used in moderation, it goes bad.
Mm-hmm.
I just see some of these young kids, these teenage girls, even these young adults, and they liken their image off of what they see. And it's not, and it's, for them, it's tangible because their thumbs are all over the screen, but it's not their reality. You know, their reality isn't a mansion and a luxury items. That's not their reality. But because this is what they see 24/7, that's their reality. So they start trying to look like what they see or talk like what they see. And it doesn't give them a chance to be themselves, to be who they truly are. They're just mimicking what they see. So there's this development that's really missing, this self-development that's missing, because it's superficial. It's on a screen. It's like their childhood, their self-image, everything that they know about themselves is on a screen. It's not in the mirror. It's not reflected around the dinner table or with your friends and family one-on-one. You know, sometimes I go to these parties and you can tell the age group, because you have a certain age group that's just in their phone. They're just typing away on their phone. Then you have the next age group that's engaging each other and talking to each other. So it's kind of like, okay, I know how old you are. I know where you're from, you know, that type of thing. I just think that social media, it could just really get in the way. I don't want to dog it completely, because I like social media and I have several social media accounts, but I'm also a little bit older and I also know about, you know, trying to, you know, keep it all together. But I just when I think back of myself as a teenager, and I just couldn't imagine having those vehicles at such easy access, and then trying to find myself among all these characters. It just seems so overwhelming. And I think, although I'm not a parent, I just would suggest that, not suggest, I just think sometimes I don't know what parents can do, because you want your child to be their own, who they want to be. They choose. That's one thing my mother always wanted: be who you are, be true to yourself. But it's this, you know, parents aren't there to monitor it every single time. So if you don't have a responsible child or a disciplined child, or if you have a child who maybe is goes along to get along, they can get lost in social media. And then it's how do you bring them back in? How do you reel them back in to get them grounded again? So I don't know. It's a really difficult, social media is a really difficult time if you're a young adult, if you're a teenager, you know, it's just a difficult thing to navigate if you don't have that understanding of who you are and what's important to you and what your value system is.
Okay. Marlon, so as you noted, you have school-age children in the home. How are you managing social media?
Well, first off, I'd like to say that I 100% agree with everything that Sarah said. And if I could repeat exactly, that would be my answer. But we did not allow the kids to have phones until they reached a certain age, closer to almost teens, I think maybe 12. And I think that's even late sometimes. I mean, I see kids that have phones, their own phones, as early as 9 and 10 sometimes. And so, like Sarah says, they probably don't even understand their own personality yet, and they're competing with these hundreds of thousands of images that they see, most of the time not being real. So as a parent, it's hard to really compete with that because, and back to another thing Sarah said, I'm going to repeat you, Sarah, my whole answer is repeating you. But I'm glad that social media was not around when I was a kid, because I feel like I have control over it. I have all of the social media accounts, but and I'm in technology. I make my living in technology. But believe it or not, I don't think I have ever posted a post on any of the social media accounts that I own right now. I just use it to look, mostly for news and to keep up with what's going on, because I just still feel that my village is the people who I talk to daily, who I see all of the time. So when something happens with my kids and I want to share, I'll share a picture, but it will be only to a certain group of people. It won't be, you know, for the world to see. So I kind of stay close knit, because I think what's happening is that the kids don't understand what privacy is. Everything is not for everybody. And they do things that disrespect themselves sometimes just to get a like. So for our kids, we sit them down constantly. It's not on a daily basis, but we sit them down constantly and we explain to them the ramifications of what you post on social media, that it's never going away. You know, when I was a kid outside playing, you had a disagreement, it stayed with those kids right there. Maybe it got outside in the neighborhood and it was some he say, she say. But now if you do something online, millions of people know about it. Millions of people respond to it. And kids, if they're getting teased or bullied, they lose their self-esteem so quickly, because it's millions versus 5 or 6. So we always sit them down and tell them, be careful of what you post and don't follow the crowd when it comes to teasing someone or making fun of someone, because you never know what that person is going through and how it may affect them. So we don't try to restrict them anymore. When they were younger, we restricted them. We don't try to restrict them anymore, but we just have constant open conversations, and we ask them what they're doing. And sometimes we say, show me what you're doing. So, I mean, you can't stop them. So unless they don't have a phone, but when they're out of your house, they still can see anything they want, because every other kid has a phone. So, you know, we just have conversations.
And it really does, I think, come back to, and I'd asked all of you, which one did you think was the most important? And I will say this, I think respect, and more specifically, the ability that they have self-respect, especially in a world that will question you, particularly, I think, as children of color, in this instance, as we're talking in this group. One of the things they have to be able to have is that sense of self-respect, that belief in themselves. And I think, as Marlon and Sarah both alluded to, not looking for other people to provide for them their reason for being. They need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. Carmen, I know that you had a particular section of the book that you were going to read for us. And as we look to wind down, I'd love to have you do that, and then we'll come to the end. So,
well, while we are on the topic of social media, I think here 2 of the R's are very important: responsibility and restraint. Parents have to take charge. My son knows that we had family time when he was growing up. We played games, we did homework, and back in the day, there weren't cell phones. But if there were cell phones, I would have said, put your cell phone on my dresser or in this box. When you are finished with your homework, your chores, A, B, C, D, then you may use your cell phone for an hour, 2 hours, depending on the age of the child. Parents have to take that responsibility and teach children how to take that responsibility too. The children have to assume that responsibility to not let the social media control them. And that's restraint. Children have to be taught to remain in control of their time, how they use their time, how they interact with family members. You know, when you come to my house and we are sitting at the table, and these are my grandchildren, I don't want to see a cell phone. You better leave it over there or keep it in your pocket. No talking on the phone while we're around the table having dinner as a family. Okay, I wouldn't do that if I'm sitting down with my son and his wife. So when Marlon, his wife, and the children come to my house, or any other grandchildren, oh no. We're here to interact with each other, have conversation, and you are here to be a part of this family, right? So exercise that restraint, and they'll learn a habit. Either they'll learn the habit or they'll know when we go to grandma's house, this is how we behave. Because the expectations are clear. And that's what parents have to do. Set the expectations. And then whenever there are expectations, there have got to be consequences. You can't have expectations and don't implement them. And when they are ignored, you don't do anything. All she does is talk. You know, you have to have consequences. So I wanted to go back to parenting. What are your thoughts on parenting? And I just want to read one section from the comment from the parents section and one from the elders section.
Carmen, excuse me.
Yes, dear.
Before Carmen go, can I go back to a question Ms. Hall asked about what help do parents need?
Oh, yes.
yes, thank you.
They need a lot of help. We're talking about parents being responsible, but and I don't mean in a disrespect or in a denigration, but many and most of these parents today do not know any better than what they are doing. Therefore, the children don't know any better. So parents have to be taught to be responsible.
Yeah.
What we're saying, they don't know how to do it. And I experienced that firsthand with those parents of the children I taught. They do not know now. And we think, oh, they should know better. They do not know any better. And that's the sad part. Now, how do we get in there and help the parents so they can help the children is a mystery for me.
Yes, they need support. And there are programs. I mean, as we have said in the book, as the elders have said, the church,
Yeah.
the school, the federal, state, and local governments, providing programs, parenting programs, child rearing, teaching parents what they need to know, to learn, to be effective parents. They don't know. Nobody comes knowing how to parent. We learn how to parent from how we were parented. And a few of the
gifting this book.
Yes, thank you. A few of the contributors said that they have, and this is something Sarah can tell us, because one of the questions Sarah responded to was, will you parent your child the way you were parented? And all of the 6 young people who are not yet parents that I asked that question said yes. 5 of the 6 said yes and no. And 1 said yes. But would you mind if Sarah tells us? Sarah, would you mind?
No.
Okay. Would you parent the way you were parented?
Yes and no. Yes, I would, because I think my mother taught me so many valuable lessons that I carry with me today. And I know I am the woman that I am because of her, because of the way she raised me and the values that she taught me, and her sayings and her just everything that she taught me to lead, to be prepared in this life. I will definitely pass that on to my children. I will pass on that legacy, because that is something that I hold so dear. No, because I think there was a lack of communication when it came to certain issues, when it came to certain topics. The topics of sex, I think that could have been stronger, and that's where I plan to, and I pray that I have that opportunity to teach my children to be more open about sex, to be more open about, what it takes, how to navigate as a young man or a young woman relationships, especially when sex is involved. That conversation was lacking, that communication was lacking. And I don't, and then not to say that in a negative about her, but I just don't think that I just think that was the cycle. She wasn't raised talking to her mom or dad about sex. So she wasn't, for me, when I started asking her a lot of questions about sex and my body and things like that, she got me a book. And, I understand that now as a woman coming up. I get it. I understand it. Back then I was kind of like, okay, it is what it is, but now I understand it, and I understand it for what it is. And I think that conversations about sex, conversation about finances, those type of things, they were lacking. And I think that it's important that I don't have that lack of communication is there. So that's why I say no, because I pray that once I have that, once I become a parent, I pray that I will have a strength or courage or the conviction to have those conversations with my children about, this is what it is. This is what it is. This is how it is. And, and to take it from there.
Yes, and parents can learn that.
And it does speak to the way parenting is evolving. But why this book is so important, because I do think that there's a foundation that is across the board. Again, respect, responsibility, reciprocity, and restraint. But parenting has evolved because life has evolved. And as Sarah just spoke about, the fact is that our parents didn't necessarily talk about sex or finances and so on. And they were pretty confident that we wouldn't probably talk about it either until way past the time, because we weren't being confronted by it. Now, because back to social media and television and cable and things that you see out there, it's thrown in their faces, in our kids' faces, at a much earlier age. You can't, as a parent, really abdicate that responsibility anymore and think that, well, it'll be okay because she won't come and answer me that question until she's 18. They're 7, 8, and 9 and being shown and exposed to things that when we were that age wasn't anywhere in our psyche, in our world. And so again, parenting, as the world has evolved, parenting has evolved, but the fundamentals, the foundations, again, around these 4 R's will always, in my opinion, always be a necessary part of how you do successful parenting. So Carmen, you were going to read a couple of excerpts for us.
Yes, so here's one of 10 major points parents made when they talked about their thoughts about parenting. It says, parenting is joyous, rewarding, challenging, and the most important responsibility, anyone can ever have. Parenting is about caring. As a parent, you make many sacrifices, but receive many rewards. Parenting is a life-changing experience. It's a 24/7 responsibility, and it is tougher than you think. So you've got to learn. You've got to be intentional about parenting. And that's what the 4 R's are about. Knowing the values you want to pass on to your child and living those values as you mold and shape your child. So 10 things one thing from the elders. The elders have said, parents should always have high expectations for themselves and their children, and should communicate these expectations to their children. It is also important for parents to communicate their love to your children. However, loving your children includes setting boundaries. If you love your children, you monitor what they say and do, and you don't let them say and do whatever they want to. Very important. And there are many more statements like that in the book.
And I would like to add this too. Every Mother's Day, I always reach out and say to, obviously to people who are mothers, and I do it on Father's Day too, that we've talked specifically about being a parent. Sometimes it's not biological. Sometimes you are a parent or exhibiting those skills to children that aren't related to you by blood. And I think it's really important that, again, it isn't just about being a parent. It is about showing and exemplifying the 4 R's that we're talking about in any interaction you have with any child. Because that impact that you have, that interaction, that sense of, oh, I met this person and they were like X or Y, that stays with them. And if we model it, regardless if we're the parent or not, regardless of if we're in the formal village or the informal village, I think there's some hope of maybe making things a little bit better. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to very briefly today give what is the one thing you want people to walk away from that you learned from reading, participating, and reading the book? What is the one thing you want people looking at you today to know about being a parent? And I'll start with you, Marlon.
I would like for people to learn that and understand that parenting never ends, and that you have to be willing to learn. You don't have all of the answers. Even when you have 2 kids in the same house, you have to parent them differently sometimes. You don't show favoritism, but you do have to parent them differently. So I would say learning, because I've learned so much, and I will apply some of the things I've read in the book. So you have to be willing to learn.
Thank you. Desiree.
Yes. Role model, role model, role model. Be a role model. Be the person, be the change that you want to see in your child. Start by setting a foundation at a very early age, and then you mold that child to be a good person, not necessarily a person who has the most money or the most cars or, you know, even the most degrees, but a good person. And that's my contribution.
Thank you. Denise?
Yes, I think preparing your children to take their place in society where people can respect them and they can respect people. And really the 4 R's that Carmen talked about in her book, but just preparing children to take their place in society, be it good contributors, whatever that is. And that's my 2 cents. But all in all, very, very good book. And Carmen, I just wish you the very best and hope that it can reach the hands of as many people possible out there, because the stuff in there is needed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gretel?
I want them to realize the importance of the 4 R's and how that can lead to a productive life, not only for them, but the people with whom they interact throughout their lives. Also to know that parenting is the most important profession there is, because as a parent, you touch the world. Not just your child, but you touch the world, because they go out into the world.
Thank you. And Sarah, as a parent to be in the future, what have you learned from? What's the thing that you're taking away that when you get to that place and you're blessed with a child, you think to yourself, I'm going to do this?
One thing I've learned is that I'm going to communicate and to develop a relationship with my child that is based on honesty and trust, because the child, when you build that type of relationship with them, as well as teaching them respect and responsibility and the 4 R's, when you communicate with them those 4 R's and teach them, you're molding them to be the person, to be the adult in the world. How you mold them as a child is how they will be as an adult. And you want one of the rewarding, I see as one of the rewarding when I talk to my friends who are parents and even my family members, and when they see how their child is becoming a productive adult, so they can raise their child as an adult, and that adult can go out in the world and contribute to the world, something meaningful, something purposeful. So one thing I do take away from this book is just learning how to raise a child to be a adult that can bring purpose, live a purposeful life, fulfilled life, and move it and carry it on, not just for them, but pass it on to their peers and their children and your, how just continue the legacy. So that's one thing I look forward to.
Thank you. Carmen, of course, is the author. You get the last word. But before I give you that last word, I would like to thank the panel, Marlon, Desiree, Denise, Gretel, and Sarah for being open and willing to share your thoughts about learnings that you have in your own life and from this book. Appreciate, and I know the audience too has appreciated your willingness to share this evening. And Carmen, thank you again for writing this book. I think for writing it in the way that you did, that makes it, I believe, and I think everybody else would agree, something that is accessible, that is not preaching to, because I think sometimes with these types of books, they tend to come off as very sort of preachy and pedantic and I know it and that's all there is to it. I think this book, because you used people, allowed people to speak in their own voice, is a book that people will find accessible. I would say again that Amazon, here's the book. Make sure. Christmas is coming, everyone. And you know, as we talked about the fact that it takes a village, I would encourage you to buy copies for your village people, not YMCA, but your village people. and let's get this book out there. And Carmen, your last thoughts.
Yes, I'd like parents to really understand that they need to be ready to be parents. Get ready, learn parenting skills. Learn the meaning of these 4 values. And these aren't the only values, there are others, but these are critical ones based on how these 4 R's, respect, responsibility, reciprocity, and restraint, if children live their lives according to these values, they are successful socially, emotionally, and academically. Okay? And parents, I would like parents, and I'm going to read, because under responsibility, I said the word parent, P-A-R-E-N-T, provides a concise, concrete list of specific parental responsibilities and is an excellent way for parents to remember major responsibilities they are expected to fulfill. P, parent. A, advocate. R, role model. E, encourager. N, nurturer. T, teacher. And there is a description, a discussion about what each of those words mean. And so finally, role model. This is a key, all are key characteristics of parents and key responsibilities of parents. But this one, parents are the first adults with whom children interact and are considered their children's most influential socializing agent, most influential. Children are always listening and watching, always. You may think they're reading over there, playing with toys over there. Yeah, but they're listening. They're hearing you on the phone. They're hearing you with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, fathers, what you're saying. They're listening and they are learning. They are seeing and they are learning. Therefore, parents must always be setting the example by what they say and do. So watch what you say and watch what you do, because you are the molders and shapers of your children. As the good book says, train up a child. Train up a child in the way that child should be, and then the child will not depart from it. And as the twig is bent, so grows the tree, right? As the twig is bent, so grows the tree. And there's another one that says, apple trees don't bear lemons. So if you're an apple tree parent, you're going to have, your fruit are going to be apples. The fruit does not fall far from the tree. The fruit is like the tree. So parents, be the best that you can be, and have children when you are ready, and always be intentional, because you are teaching, and be intentional about what you want to teach your children, what you want your children to learn. Amen. Enough.
Amen.
And
Amen.
Thank you, everybody.
Amen.
Thank you from ICMBC. Encourage everybody again, go to Amazon, buy the book. It's Christmas, buy it as Christmas gifts, buy it as a Thanksgiving gift. If you don't do Christmas, that's okay. Again, thank you everybody, and thank you to our audience. Have a blessed and safe evening and week.
Bye-bye. Thanks for